The spit hit his worn leather boot before Jake Thompson could even dodge. The cruel laughter of the younger cowboys echoed through the barn as he wiped away the filth with an old rag. 58 years of life, 40 of them dedicated to ranches across Texas, Montana, and Wyoming. And there he was, being treated like trash by boys who barely knew how to ride straight. "Go home, old man. Your time's up," the foreman mocked, a 30-something guy with an ego bigger than his skills. Jake clenched his fists, feeling every aching muscle in his body scream. Had he really reached the end of the line? That night, as he packed his belongings in the miserable bunkhouse, a black pickup truck pulled up in front of the ranch. Out stepped a woman who would make any man stop for a second look. But it wasn't her beauty that froze Jake in place. It was the look in her eyes, that gleam of someone who had a proposal that would change everything. Jake Thompson knew every inch of that barn better than he knew the wrinkles on his own face. Every creaking board, every rusty nail, every ray of sunlight that came through the gaps in the old wood. 40 years riding across the western states had etched into his skin the dust of the trails and into his soul an unconditional love for the cowboy life. But today, something felt different in the September morning air at the Double Creek Ranch in the heart of Wyoming. "Hey, walking mummy, still breathing?" Derek's voice, the new foreman, cut through the silence like a rusty knife. Jake didn't turn immediately. He kept adjusting the saddle on the chestnut horse, his calloused fingers working the buckles with the precision of someone who'd repeated that motion thousands of times. Have you ever wondered how long it takes for a man to completely lose the respect of others? For Jake, it took just 6 months, the time Derek had been in charge. The spit came next, that cowardly gesture that only small men inside have the guts to do. It hit the side of Jake's right boot, the same boot that had stepped on practically every western state in America. The other cowboys, all between 25 and 35, burst into laughter. That sound echoed through the barn like breaking glass, shattering what little dignity Jake still held onto with tooth and nail. "Your reflexes are as slow as your usefulness here, old man." Derek walked closer, his heavy steps deliberately theatrical. He wanted an audience, and he'd gotten one. The others stopped working to watch the humiliation show. Jake finally turned around, and for a brief second, Derek saw something in that man's eyes that made him swallow hard. It was fire. It was history. It was danger. But the moment passed. Jake simply grabbed an old rag hanging from his back pocket of his faded jeans and bent down to clean his boot. Each movement was slow, controlled, as if he were taming a wild horse and not cleaning spit from some punk kid. "My reflexes might be slower," Jake said with a voice that sounded like sandpaper on wood, "but I can still tell the difference between a real man and a boy pretending to be one." The tension in the barn got so thick you could cut it with a knife. The other cowboys stopped laughing. Derek felt blood rush to his face, that angry shame of someone who knows they've just been put in their place in front of everyone. "You're fired, old man. Get your shit and get off my ranch before I make you leave by force." "Your ranch?" Jake stood up slowly, every vertebra in his spine protesting against years of hard work. "Boy, I was breaking Mustangs when you were still in diapers. This ain't your ranch. You're just an employee like me. The difference is I know my place, and you are still trying to prove something you do not have." That's when the punch came. Derek was younger, faster, stronger. The fist connected with Jake's jaw with a dry sound that made everyone present step back. Jake stumbled backward, his body hitting the barn's wooden wall. The taste of blood filled his mouth, metallic and bitter. For a second, the world spun in a kaleidoscope of pain and humiliation. "Someone get this fossil out of here before I do worse," Derek growled, shaking the hand that had hit Jake. The other cowboys, cowards that they were, immediately obeyed. 2 of them grabbed Jake by the arms and started dragging him out of the barn. He didn't resist. What would be the point? Fighting men 20 years younger would only prolong the humiliation. Have you ever felt that moment when you realize the world simply moved on and left you behind? Jake felt that as he was thrown into the dust outside the barn. His old backpack was thrown right after, landing beside him with a dull thud. Inside it, his entire life fit. 3 changes of clothes, a faded photo from better times, a harmonica he hadn't played in years, and $200 saved. "And don't come back here, understand?" Derek appeared in the barn doorway, his silhouette cut against the interior light. "Cowboys your age are dead weight. The West has changed, old man. There's no more room for dinosaurs like you." The words were cruel, but what hurt most was the silence from the others. None of them said anything. None of them took Jake's side. The old code of the West, that sense of brotherhood among cowboys, had died somewhere between generations. Jake spit blood into the dry Wyoming earth and grabbed his backpack. He said nothing, didn't look back, just started walking toward the bunkhouse where he'd slept for the last 8 months. Each step hurt, not just from the beating, but from the humiliation that weighed more than any physical load. Was Derek right? Was there really no more place for men like him in this new American West? The Double Creek Ranch bunkhouse had seen better days, just like Jake. The wooden walls were peeling, revealing layers of paint from decades past, each one telling the story of a different era. Jake entered the tiny room he'd called home, if you could call that home. A narrow bed, a lame closet, and a window that didn't close right. Luxury wasn't something cowboys looked for, but dignity was. And there, in that moment, Jake felt he'd lost even that. He sat on the edge of the bed, and the mattress sank with a groan of protest. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear or weakness, but from contained rage. How many times in life can a man be knocked down before he simply gives up getting back up? Jake had lost count. At 58, his body was a map of scars, the mark on his left shoulder from when a bull had thrown him against a fence in Montana, the scar on his forearm from barbed wire in New Mexico, the knees that popped every morning, reminding him of thousands of rides. He opened the backpack and began organizing his belongings. There wasn't much to organize, but the mechanical act of folding clothes and arranging things gave his brain something to focus on besides the humiliation burning in his chest. The photo fell from inside a shirt, a faded image from a time when he still smiled naturally. 25 years ago, at a rodeo in Texas, he'd been a champion. Young, strong, full of dreams. Where had that man gone? "You know what the problem with getting old in the West is, buddy?" Jake spoke to the empty room, his voice echoing off the lonely walls. "Nobody remembers what you were. They only see what you are now." He ran his thumb over the photo's surface, as if he could touch that lost time. His ex-wife was beside him in the image, smiling in that way that had made his heart stop the first time they met. She'd left him 15 years ago, tired of competing with horses and ranches for his attention. The bunkhouse door opened with a sharp creak. Jake didn't turn immediately, assuming it was one of the cowboys coming to finish the humiliation job. But the footsteps were different, lighter, more measured. "Jake Thompson." The voice was female, soft, but with a firmness that indicated the owner wasn't used to being ignored. He turned slowly, and what he saw left him momentarily speechless. The woman in the doorway had that kind of beauty that didn't need makeup or expensive clothes. Her green eyes shone with sharp intelligence, and her dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, genuine cowboy boots, not those tourist ones, and a plaid shirt that had seen hard work. She must be in her early 40s, Jake estimated, but there was something timeless about her. "Who's asking?" he replied, his voice still hoarse from the earlier confrontation. "My name's Sarah Mackenzie. I have a ranch about 50 miles from here near Jackson Hole." She walked in without asking permission, her eyes sweeping the miserable room with an unreadable expression. "I heard about what happened in the barn. News travels fast in these circles." Jake felt shame burn his cheeks again. Great. Now the whole region would know he'd been humiliated and kicked out like a dog. And let me guess, you came to see the show? See the old cowboy fallen in the mud? No. Sarah approached, and Jake could smell the leather and open air coming from her, the honest perfume of someone who actually worked on a ranch. I came to make you a proposal, one that could change your situation if you have the courage to accept it. She stopped in front of him, and Jake had to look up to meet her eyes. There was determination there, but also something more. Respect. When was the last time anyone had looked at Jake Thompson with respect? What would this proposal be? Jake stood slowly, recovering some of his upright posture. He might be hurt and humiliated, but he still had pride. Sarah crossed her arms, studying him with those penetrating green eyes. My ranch, the Mackenzie Ranch, specializes in breaking wild horses. Not those domestic horses that any kid with YouTube can learn to ride. I'm talking about real Mustangs, horses that have never seen a rope or saddle in their lives. Jake felt something stir inside his chest, a feeling that hadn't visited in a long time. It was interest. It was possibility. And what do I have to do with that? He asked, though he was already beginning to understand where this was going. Sarah smiled for the first time, and it was like the sun rising after a long, cold night. Jake, I researched you, made calls, talked to people who've known you for decades. You're not just some old cowboy. You're Jake Thunder Thompson, the man who broke Diablo Negro, the Mustang that sent 12 men to the hospital before you. The nickname made Jake blink in surprise. It had been years since anyone called him Thunder. That was a name from another era, from when he still had fire in his soul and strength in his legs. That was 20 years ago, he said, his voice lower. I'm not that man anymore. Sarah shrugged. Maybe not. But skills don't die, Jake. They just sleep. And I need someone with your skills to break a specific horse. Why me? The question came out more vulnerable than Jake intended. Why not hire some young guy full of energy like that idiot Derek? Sarah stepped closer, and this time Jake could see the absolute seriousness in her eyes. Because young guys have energy, but they don't have wisdom. They have strength, but they don't have patience. And this particular horse, he's already broken 3 ribs and arm, and the confidence of 5 horse breakers I tried to hire. I need someone who understands that breaking a horse isn't about domination. It's about mutual respect, and something tells me you understand that better than anyone. The silence that followed was heavy with possibilities. Jake looked at this woman, Sarah Mackenzie, and tried to understand what she really wanted. 40 years in the American West had taught him that deals too good to be true usually came with dangerous fine print. What's the catch? He asked directly, without beating around the bush. Real cowboys didn't waste time with small talk. Sarah let out a low laugh, almost musical. Straight to the point. I like that. She walked to the bunkhouse window and looked outside, at the ranch that had been Jake's temporary home. The catch is that this horse, a Mustang we rescued from an abusive situation, is the key to saving my ranch. I have a wealthy buyer willing to pay $50,000 for him, but only if he's broken. If we fail, I lose the ranch to the bank in 3 months. $50,000. The number echoed in Jake's mind like a church bell. It was more money than he'd seen together in years, but it wasn't about the money, not completely. It was about the challenge. It was about proving he still had value. And what would my cut be in this transaction? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral, though his heart was beating faster. $10,000 if you can break him in 3 months, Sarah replied, turning to face him again. Plus room and board during the period. My ranch has decent lodging, not this hole here, and Jake... She paused, choosing the next words carefully. You'd have respect. From my employees, from me, from everyone who works there. We don't tolerate the kind of shit that happened here today. Have you ever had one of those moments where a door opens right when you thought they were all locked? Jake was having one now, but experience had taught caution. Why you? he asked. "A woman running a wild horse-breaking ranch in Wyoming isn't exactly common. What's your story, Sarah Mackenzie?" Her smile faded a bit, replaced by something darker. "My father built the Mackenzie Ranch from scratch. He was one of the best horsebreakers in the West. Maybe you've heard of Marcus Mackenzie?" Jake felt recognition hit him like lightning. Marcus Mackenzie was a legend. The man had broken horses for presidents, for the cavalry, for anyone who needed the best. "Marcus was your father. I met him once, at a rodeo in Montana, years ago." "He died 2 years ago," Sarah continued, her voice getting rougher. "Heart attack while working with a nervous colt. Since then, I've been trying to keep the ranch running, but—" She paused, swallowing hard. "It's been a struggle. Banks don't take women seriously in this business. Clients hesitate, and good horsebreakers don't want to work under a girl's command." The last word came out bitter. Jake understood immediately. The American West had changed in many ways, but machismo was still very much alive. "So you need this sale to survive," he concluded. Sarah nodded. "Exactly. And this horse, we call him Tempest. He's special, Jake. Has pure wild Mustang bloodline, incredible strength, and a beauty that would make any buyer drool. But he also has trauma. The previous owner abused him terribly before we lost track of the man and rescued the animal." "Trauma never fully goes away," Jake said thoughtfully, his own scars, physical and emotional, pulsing with memory. "A traumatized horse is like a traumatized man. You can help him cope, but the marks always remain." Sarah took a step forward, and this time Jake could see unshed tears shining in her eyes. "I know. That's why I need someone who understands trauma. Someone who has their own battles and still gets up every morning and continues." This strong woman's vulnerability caught Jake off guard. He'd expected business, numbers, contracts. He hadn't expected raw humanity. 3 months, he said slowly. "You really think I can break a traumatized Mustang in 3 months when 5 other horsebreakers failed?" Sarah held his gaze. "No, I think you can do it in 2, because you're not going to try to break him the traditional way. You're going to heal him." The words hung in the air, like dust suspended by sunlight. Heal. When was the last time Jake Thompson had thought about healing, whether for horses or himself? He looked around the miserable bunkhouse, thought about the spit on his boot, the humiliation in the barn, the emptiness that awaited him if he refused this offer. And then he thought about the adrenaline of working with wild horses again, the challenge, the possibility of redemption. "When do we start?" The words came out before his cautious mind could stop them. Sarah broke into a genuine smile, the kind that transforms an entire face. "Now. I already have your backpack in my truck. Well, I may have been a bit presumptuous and grabbed it while you were thinking." Jake couldn't help a laugh. The first genuine one in months. "Lady, you're bold. I gotta admit." "In the West, Jake, you either wait for opportunities or you create them," Sarah replied, already turning to leave. "And something told me you're the kind of man who understands that, or at least used to be." The provocation was light, but Jake felt it as a challenge. Maybe that was exactly what he needed. Someone who believed he was still capable of great things, even when he himself had doubts. They walked together out of the bunkhouse, and Jake could see Sarah's black pickup parked there, a new Ford F-250, well-maintained but clearly used for real work. It wasn't a showroom vehicle. It was a tool. "Is there anything I should know about this Tempest before I officially accept?" Jake asked as they approached the vehicle. Sarah stopped with her hand on the door handle. "Yes, he's already killed a man." Jake's blood froze. "What?" Sarah looked at him with deadly seriousness. "The previous owner. We don't know exactly what happened, but when we arrived to rescue the horse, we found the man dead in the corral. Tempest was standing over him, guarding the body like he was on watch. The police determined it was self-defense. The man had spurs with spikes and a whip with metal tips. The horse just fought back. The drive to the Mackenzie Ranch took almost 2 hours, winding through rural roads that cut through Wyoming's dramatic landscape. Jake spent most of the time in silence, looking out the window while processing what he'd just accepted. A horse that had killed a man, a ranch on the brink of bankruptcy, a desperate woman betting everything on a 58-year-old cowboy who'd just been humiliated and kicked out of his last job. What could go wrong? "You're too quiet," Sarah commented, breaking the silence as she navigated a particularly tight curve. Having second thoughts already? Jake turned his head to look at her. In the daylight coming through the truck windows, he could see more details, the worry lines around her eyes, the determination in her jaw, the way her hands gripped the steering wheel with confidence, born from years of driving difficult terrain. "Just thinking," he replied, "thinking about how many times in life a man can reinvent himself before finally accepting who he's become." "Deep for a Thursday afternoon," Sarah said with a half-smile. "But I understand the feeling. After Dad died, I had to reinvent myself from Marcus Mackenzie's daughter to the owner of Marcus Mackenzie's ranch. And let me tell you, Jake, it wasn't easy. Every client questioned my decisions. Every supplier tried to screw me over. The employees themselves looked at me like I was a child playing ranch." "And how did you deal with that?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. He'd spent his entire life in a male-dominated world, but had never really stopped to think about the perspective from the other side. Sarah shrugged. "By proving them wrong, one day at a time. Breaking horses they said were impossible, making deals they swore I'd lose. And when that didn't work, well, I just told everyone to go to hell and did it my way anyway." Jake let out a genuine laugh. "You've got fire, lady. I gotta respect that." The ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage materializing. Well-maintained fences, traditional red-painted barns, organized corrals, and in the background, Wyoming's mountains rising like ancient sentinels. It was different from Double Creek. It was home. At least it felt like one. The truck parked near the main house, a 2-story wooden structure that had that authentic rustic charm that tourists paid fortunes to experience in expensive hotels. Sarah jumped out of the vehicle with the agility of someone who'd made that movement thousands of times. "Come on, I want to show you where you'll be staying before you meet Tempest." The bunkhouse Sarah showed was another world compared to the hole at Double Creek. Clean, spacious, with a real bed, a functional closet, and even a small private bathroom. "This is," Jake began, not finding the right words. "It's what you deserve," Sarah completed. "My father always said that you treat your employees with respect and they give you loyalty. Treat them like trash, and that's all you'll get back." Jake placed his old backpack on the bed. The contrast between the worn item and the clean environment was stark. "Your father was a wise man," he said softly. Sarah nodded, and Jake could see the pain of loss briefly crossing her face. "He was. And I try to honor his teachings every day." She turned to the door. "Rest a bit if you want. Or if you're ready, I can take you to meet Tempest now." Every logical fiber in Jake's body said to rest, recover from the hellish day it had been. But curiosity, that same curiosity that had led him to break his first horse at 16, was burning too strong. "Let's meet this killer horse," he said, and could swear he saw a flash of respect in Sarah's eyes. The corral where Tempest was kept stood separate from the others, surrounded by higher and more reinforced fences. As they approached, Jake could hear it. A low, threatening whinny that sent chills down his spine. It wasn't the sound of a normal horse. It was the sound of an animal that had known the worst of humanity and had decided never to trust again. Have you ever heard the sound of pure trauma? Jake was hearing it now. "There!" Sarah pointed, and Jake finally saw Tempest. The mustang was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Black coat like the darkest night, defined muscles under the skin, eyes that shone with intelligence and fury. He had scars. Jake could see them even from a distance. Whip marks, spur scars, signs of abuse as evident as written words. "My God," Jake whispered. "He was tortured," Sarah said, her voice trembling with contained rage. "The previous owner was a monster who thought brutality was training. When we finally managed to track down where the horse was, it was almost too late. Tempest had killed the man 3 days earlier. He stayed without food or water, just guarding the body, as if—" She paused, swallowing hard. "As if he was making sure the monster was really dead." Jake approached the fence, his movements slow and deliberate. Tempest immediately focused on him, ears moving back, a clear defensive posture. "Hey, buddy," Jake said softly, his voice dropping into that special tone cowboys use with nervous horses. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here. You can believe that." The horse snorted, stamping his hoof against the ground, a clear threat. "The other horsebreakers tried force," Sarah explained, staying a few steps behind Jake. "Ropes, sedatives, one even suggested using a taser. I sent them away. I won't add more trauma to what he's already been through." Jake nodded, not taking his eyes off Tempest. Force never works with trauma. It just adds more layers of fear and anger. For several minutes, Jake just stood there, still at the fence, letting the horse get used to his presence. He didn't try to get closer, didn't make sudden movements, just existed in the same space, breathing the same air. "You remind me of someone," Jake murmured, speaking more to himself than to the horse. "An old, wounded cowboy that everyone gave up on. But you know what I discovered today? Sometimes all you need is one person who still believes in you." Tempest stopped stamping his hoof. His ears moved forward slightly, a tiny sign of curiosity. Jake smiled, a small but genuine smile. "That's it. That's right, buddy. You still have curiosity in there. Still have trust buried under all that armor of anger. Let's find out together if we can dig down to it." Sarah approached quietly, standing beside Jake. "You talked to him more in the last 5 minutes than the other horsebreakers did in entire weeks." Jake shrugged. "Because I understand what it's like to carry scars that nobody sees. And I understand what it's like to have people give up on you before even giving you a real chance." "Do you think you can break him?" Sarah asked, her voice loaded with hope and fear in equal parts. Jake finally looked away from Tempest to face her. "Break is the wrong word, Sarah. I'm not going to break him. I'm going to heal him. I'm going to earn his trust. And God willing, I'm going to help him understand that not all humans are monsters." He paused, looking back at the magnificent wounded horse. "And who knows, in the process, maybe I'll heal a bit of myself too." The first 3 days at the Mackenzie Ranch were a lesson in patience that Jake didn't know he was still capable of learning. He woke before sunrise, a decades-old habit his body refused to abandon, and went straight to Tempest's corral. Not to train, not to break, just to be present. He'd sit outside the fence with a hot cup of coffee, watching the mustang move in the confined space, studying every movement, every reaction, every sign of body language. "You're the laziest horsebreaker I've ever seen," joked Miguel, one of the cowboys who worked on the ranch, on the second morning. He was a young man of maybe 28, but unlike the boys at Double Creek, there was genuine respect in his voice. 3 days, and you haven't even entered the corral yet." Jake took a sip of coffee, not taking his eyes off Tempest. "Haste is what breaks horses and men, kid. Slowness is what builds trust." Sarah appeared regularly, bringing financial reports or just checking on progress. Jake could see the worry growing in her eyes with each day that passed without visible advances. "Jake," she said on the 4th day, her voice tense, "I don't want to rush, but the bank won't wait forever. I need to show some progress." He looked at her, seeing the stress written in every line of her face. "Do you want progress, or do you want success?" "What's the difference?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms defensively. Jake stood up from the boards where he was sitting, his joints protesting. "Progress is going in there today, forcing a rope on him, and having him throw me against the fence tomorrow. Success is waiting until he's ready to accept human presence, and then building from there. One is quick and futile. The other is slow but lasting." Sarah looked at Tempest, who was at the opposite end of the corral, watching the human interaction with cautious eyes. "What if we don't have time for lasting?" Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, a paternal gesture that surprised them both. "Then we fail trying to do it right, not fail taking shortcuts that only cause more damage. Your father would understand that." The words seemed to calm something in Sarah. She nodded slowly. "All right, do it your way, but Jake, please make it work." The vulnerability in her voice broke something inside the old cowboy. He had to make this work. Not just for Sarah or the ranch, but for all of them, including himself and the wounded horse watching from the other side of the fence. On the 5th day, Jake finally entered the corral, not with ropes or tools, just him, his worn boots, and patience that had been forged in 40 years of working with animals. Tempest immediately backed away, assuming a defensive posture in the farthest corner. "I know," Jake said softly, standing still near the entrance. "Men in your space mean pain, mean fear. But I'm gonna be here, buddy. I'm gonna be here every day until you understand I'm not like him." Hours passed. Jake didn't move. Tempest didn't approach. But something was happening. A silent understanding was being woven between the old wounded man and the young traumatized horse. Can you feel when a connection is starting to form? It's like electricity in the air before a storm, a tension that promises change. In the 2nd week, the miracle began. Jake had entered the corral as usual, but this time he brought an apple. He didn't offer it to the horse, just cut it into pieces and ate it slowly, letting some pieces accidentally fall to the ground. Tempest watched every movement with those intelligent, distrustful eyes. After Jake left, the horse waited a full hour before cautiously approaching and sniffing the apple pieces on the ground. "He ate it," Sarah exclaimed when Jake told her that evening. They were on the main house porch, watching the sun set over Wyoming's mountains. "It's a small step, but he ate something that came from you." Jake nodded, smiling slightly. "It's about association. My presence needs to mean good things. Safety, food, calm, not pain." "How did you learn this?" Sarah asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Jake was quiet for a moment, remembering. "I had a horse once, when I was young like you. Called him Rusty. He'd been abused by the previous owner, not as bad as Tempest, but bad enough. I spent 6 months earning his trust, and when I finally got it—" He paused, uninvited emotion tightening his throat. "It was the most loyal friendship I ever had. Horses don't forget, Sarah. Neither the bad nor the good." In the 3rd week, Jake was sitting inside the corral, not standing but sitting in the dirt, making himself smaller, less threatening. Tempest had stopped backing away immediately when Jake entered. Now the horse stayed in his corner, Jake stayed in his, and the two existed in the same space without conflict. Progress, slow, painful, but real progress. "You know what's funny?" Jake said aloud, speaking to Tempest, even though the horse was meters away. "People look at us too and see failures. A horse that killed a man, a cowboy who was humiliated and kicked out. But you know what I see? 2 survivors, 2 fighters who refused to give up, even when the world said they were useless." Tempest's ears moved forward, catching every word. Jake continued, his voice low and rhythmic. "The world judges too fast, buddy. Judges by appearance, by age, by scars. But scars don't define you. They just prove you went through hell and came out the other side." He paused, looking at his own calloused, marked hands. "We're still here, still fighting, and that counts for something." At the end of the 3rd week, it happened. Jake was sitting in the corral as usual when he heard footsteps behind him. Slowly, without turning his head, he waited. The footsteps came closer, closer, until he felt Tempest's warm breath on his neck. Every muscle in Jake's body wanted to turn, wanted to reach out and touch the horse. But he kept himself completely still, barely breathing. Tempest snorted softly, warming Jake's ear. Then, with a surprising gentleness for such a large animal, the Mustang pushed his muzzle against the cowboy's shoulder. It was contact. It was trust. It was the beginning of something they both desperately needed. Connection. Jake felt tears stinging his eyes. When was the last time he'd cried? He couldn't remember. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you for trusting me, buddy. I promise I won't let you down." Tempest stood there for another minute, and then, with the same caution, backed away. But something had changed. A bridge had been built, and Jake Thompson, the 58-year-old cowboy everyone had written off as useless, finally felt that maybe, just maybe, he still had value in this world after all. Sarah was at the fence when Jake emerged from the corral that afternoon, and one look at his face told the whole story. "He touched you," she said. It wasn't a question. Jake just nodded, still processing the raw emotion of the moment. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that lights up an entire face. "So you did it. You really did it." But Jake shook his head. "No, we did it. You gave me a chance when nobody else would. You bet on a wounded horse and a broken man. And maybe, just maybe, that bet's going to pay off." The next months would be challenging. Jake knew that. Breaking, no, healing, Tempest completely would take time, patience, and a few more battles against internal doubts. But for the first time in years, Jake Thompson woke up in the morning with purpose. He had a mission. He had respect. He had a second chance that few men in life receive. And as he watched the sun set over the Mackenzie Ranch, with Sarah beside him and Tempest watching from a distance, Jake understood a fundamental truth. It's never too late to start over, as long as you find someone who still believes in your potential. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where everything seemed lost, but a person or opportunity completely changed your trajectory? Share your story in the comments. Maybe your experience is exactly what someone needs to hear today, to not give up on their own dreams. Because just like Jake and Tempest discovered, sometimes all we need is someone who sees our value when the whole world says we have nothing left to offer.